The summer heat in the affluent, meticulously regulated community of Oakhaven Estates was a physical weight, thick and suffocating. Arthur Hayes, a software developer who just closed a lucrative startup sale, had bought his modest home here 2 years ago, drawn by the quiet and the promise of a peaceful life. His peace shattered the moment the blue, plastic liner of his new, custom-ordered, in-ground pool was finally unrolled. The pool itself was a dream realized, a 12,000-gallon testament to his hard work. The trouble, however, wasn't the pool. It was Brenda Sterling, the self-appointed high priestess and chair of the Oakhaven HOA Architectural Review Board. Brenda lived 3 houses down, a fortress of beige stucco and judgment, and she viewed Arthur's happiness as an existential threat to Oakhaven's uniform aesthetic. The first sign of war was not a letter, but a siren-like shriek. Arthur was standing by the half-filled pool, enjoying the sight of the shimmering blue water from the tanker truck's hose, when Brenda materialized at his property line. "Mr. Hayes," her voice was a sharp instrument, cutting through the lazy afternoon air. She was dressed in a pristine white tennis skirt, not a hair out of place on her severe blonde bob. "What in God's name do you think you're doing?" Arthur turned slowly, wiping sweat from his brow. "Filling my pool, Miss Sterling. It's a pool, you know, for swimming." "That thing is a gross violation of Section 4B, Article III of the Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions, pertaining to unauthorized major construction affecting property lines and water use allocation," she spat, pulling a laminated, dog-eared binder from a wicker tote bag. "You never submitted a proper form. Where is the Form ARB 27C? Where is the required pre-installation survey? This is an emergency stop work order." Arthur sighed, already weary. He had submitted the plans 3 months ago, along with every fee and form the HOA demanded. He had even confirmed approval with the previous ARB chair, a kindly retired man who had since moved to Florida. He knew Brenda was simply blocking the process. "Ms. Sterling," Arthur replied, his voice calm, "I submitted the full package, including the ARB 27C, on May 1st. I have the signed and dated receipt. The plans were approved by the board on May 20th. I can email you the scanned copies right now." Brenda's face, usually set in a mask of haughty disapproval, actually flushed. That is impossible. There has been a change in board leadership. All approvals are subject to re-review. And furthermore," she gestured dramatically to the filling pool, "you are depleting our precious community water reserves. Do you know how much a pool of that size wastes?" "It's a one-time fill, Brenda," Arthur said, his patience thinning. "And it's coming from a commercial, private water tanker, not the Oakhaven Municipal Supply." He pointed to the non-potable water sign taped to the side of the truck. She didn't even look. Her mind was already on the next attack. "I'm issuing a fine for unauthorized activity and a mandate to cease and desist. If that pool is not drained within 72 hours, we will pursue legal action and lien your property for the full cost of removal." Arthur watched her power walk back to her beige fortress. He knew this wasn't about forms or water. This was about control. This was about a self-made man daring to do something aesthetically pleasing and fun in a neighborhood she had mentally frozen in time. The pool was now half full, a tantalizing symbol of defiance. He had a choice: back down, drain $20,000 worth of water, and admit defeat or fight. That night, Arthur sat by the shimmering blue water, which now reached the coping stones. He checked his email. 2 new messages, one from the HOA, formally demanding the pool be drained. The second, an unsolicited email from a local law firm specializing in HOA litigation, titled "Fighting the Power, Know Your Rights." The total fine was already $2,500. He wasn't even swimming yet. The fight had officially begun. Arthur's first act of defiance wouldn't be legal. It would be a simple, physical act of enjoying what was rightfully his. He stripped down to his swim trunks, took a deep breath of the humid night air, and executed a perfect cannonball. The resulting splash sent a wave high into the night air, where it momentarily caught the moonlight. He imagined the sound was loud enough to reach Brenda's pristine, silent house. Part 1 beat: Defiance and Escalation. Arthur refuses to drain the pool, taking his first swim and cementing the conflict. He now faces a $2,500 fine and a cease and desist. Brenda Sterling's response was swift, punitive, and utterly procedural. The next day, Arthur received a certified letter with 3 separate violation notices: $5,000 for failure to comply with a stop work order, $1,500 for excessive noise, water feature at night, and a $10,000 lien notice. The total was now enough to buy a small car. Arthur hired the lawyer from the unsolicited email, Marcus Thorne, a sharp-witted man whose office decor seemed to be based on framed copies of winning court judgments against HOAs. Thorne didn't mince words. "They're not just harassing you, Arthur. They're trying to financially coerce you," Thorne explained, leaning back in his leather chair. "Brenda is using the covenants as a weapon. She knows most people fold when the fines exceed 5 figures. But here's the kicker, you're right. You submitted the forms, you got approval. I've already filed a counterclaim for breach of contract and malicious prosecution." "So we fight it in court?" Arthur asked. "Oh, we will, but that takes time. And time is what Brenda will use to make your life a living hell. She'll nitpick everything," Thorne warned. "Trash cans, lawn length, paint chips, holiday decorations. She's looking for leverage. You need to be impeccably compliant with everything except the pool." Arthur took the advice to heart. He became a model homeowner, meticulously tending to his front yard, cleaning his gutters weekly, and even repainting his mailbox post a few shades lighter beige to avoid any possible violation. But he didn't drain the pool. He swam in it every day, waving cheerfully to Brenda as she peered through her lace-curtained window. The conflict escalated when Brenda went after the pool itself. She found a forgotten subclause, Section 6A, Article V, Permanent Residential Structures, which stated, "Any permanent structure with a depth exceeding 4 feet that is not a pre-approved community amenity must be fully enclosed by a wall or fence that matches the architectural style of the main residence and is no less than 8 feet high." Arthur's fence was a perfectly standard 6-foot cedar privacy fence, approved during the initial purchase. Brenda declared the pool a permanent structure and demanded the 2-foot increase, knowing the cost and labor would be a major deterrent. Instead of fighting the clause, Arthur's clever side took over. He consulted with a landscape architect, an eccentric man named Leo who relished the idea of fighting HOA tyranny. 8 feet, eh? Arthur mused, walking the perimeter with Leo. "Okay, let's make it 8 feet, but let's not make it a fence." The next week, a team of workers arrived, not with lumber, but with bamboo, carefully grown, mature privacy hedges, and decorative latticework. They installed a structure that was technically an 8-foot-high, freestanding, horticultural enclosure. A stunning, lush green wall of vegetation and artistic lattice that was both beautiful and completely opaque. It perfectly met the 8-foot requirement for enclosure, but because it was classified as landscaping rather than a permanent residential structure, it fell under a different, far looser set of guidelines. Brenda emerged again, this time with a building inspector in tow. She was furious, her lips thin white lines. "That is a structure, it's a wall. It must have a building permit." The inspector, a weary man named Dale, looked at Arthur, then at the lush bamboo and flowering vine-covered lattice. He consulted his clipboard, then looked at Brenda's imperious face. "It's landscaping, Miss Sterling," Dale sighed, shaking his head. "It's a privacy screen. It's not attached to the house, and it meets the height requirement for enclosure. It's actually quite nice. I'm afraid I see no code violation." He gave Arthur a small, conspiratorial wink and left. Brenda stood defeated, facing the impenetrable green wall. Her view of the pool was completely blocked. Her leverage was gone. Arthur, swimming laps behind his new horticultural enclosure, could hear her furious, defeated stamp of a heel on the asphalt. Part 2 beat, a tactical victory. Arthur cleverly uses landscaping to neutralize Brenda's attack on the fence requirement, turning a mandatory upgrade into a beautiful, unassailable privacy screen and infuriating the HOA chair. The pool was safe, but the war was far from over. Brenda, denied her view and her legal leverage, pivoted to a campaign of social ostracization and bureaucratic terror. Arthur's mail was suddenly delayed. His guests were questioned at the main gate. The HOA sent weekly, escalating notices of impending lien for minor violations. One was for improper presentation of a recycling bin. Arthur, however, was learning to play the game, and he was getting good at it. He was a master of optimization, and he realized that if he couldn't have peace, he could at least have fun. He reread the Oakhaven Estates covenants, all 300 pages of them, with a magnifying glass. He wasn't just looking for loopholes, he was looking for opportunities. His lawyer, Thorne, was a legal samurai, and together they found their next weapon, Section 7D, Article II, Commercial Operations in Residence. This clause was intended to prevent things like noisy auto repair shops or daycare centers. It stated that commercial activity was strictly prohibited. unless the activity was classified as short-term residential hospitality, defined as operating a legitimate licensed bed and breakfast, guest house, or private club. The reasoning was that the HOA didn't want to block wealthy residents from operating quiet, high-end income streams, as long as they complied with all local business codes. An idea, so audacious it made Arthur grin, began to form. If Brenda was going to treat his property like a business by constantly issuing fines and scrutinizing every detail, he would turn it into a real business. He filed for a municipal business license, an LLC, and a short-term hospitality permit. He called his new venture the Hayes Resort. The horticultural enclosure that had started as a defensive measure was suddenly a brilliant asset. He invested another chunk of money, adding lush, exotic potted plants, a small, professional-grade outdoor kitchen, a cabana with a commercial-grade sound system playing soft jazz, and professional, subtle resort lighting. He hired a part-time pool concierge, a friendly elderly gentleman named Walter, whose only job was to silently, impeccably maintain the pool area and welcome guests. He wasn't running an Airbnb that anyone could book. Arthur's resort was a private club. Arthur created a website and started accepting memberships, but not from the general public. His initial members were his old friends, high-net-worth clients, and people who appreciated high-end privacy. They paid a significant annual fee, enough to cover all his HOA fines and legal fees combined, for the exclusive privilege of occasionally using the pool area on designated days, like having a private club membership. Walter would greet them, show them to the pool, and ensure the music and ambience were perfect. The first official business day of the Hayes Resort was a Sunday. A sleek black luxury sedan pulled up. A quiet, impeccably dressed couple, a renowned neurosurgeon and his wife, were welcomed by Walter. They spent a relaxing afternoon by the pool, sipping sparkling water, reading, and occasionally taking a quiet dip. Brenda Sterling's arrival was not quiet. She slammed her car door and stormed up to the now-gated entrance, where a tasteful brass plaque read, HAYES Resort Private Membership Only. "What in the name of the covenants is going on here, Hayes?" she screeched, shaking her fist at the high green wall. "That's commercial activity, it's a hotel." Arthur, wearing a crisp white resort shirt and sunglasses, emerged from his cabana with a perfectly poured iced tea. "Good afternoon, Miss Sterling," he said politely. "This is not a hotel. It is the Hayes Resort, a licensed private club operating under the short-term residential hospitality exception in Section 7D. He handed her a professionally printed brochure that outlined the executive membership tier and listed his business license number. "All members are background checked, and we strictly enforce the low-impact sound policy. We're in full compliance with all local codes and now, even your own covenants." Brenda was speechless. Her face was a patchwork of disbelief and fury. She had used the rules to try and crush him. He had used the same rules to legally build a profit-generating fortress. He was no longer just a homeowner. He was a legitimate business owner in Oakhaven Estates. Part 3 beat, ironic reversal. Arthur turns the HOA's rule against commercial activity into his greatest strength, legally establishing his pool as a private, high-end resort, which is permitted under a loophole meant for the wealthy elite. The HOA chair is legally powerless to shut down a compliant, licensed business. The Hayes Resort became the talk of Oakhaven, not just for its audacity, but for its genuine exclusivity and success. Arthur, ever the clever entrepreneur, kept the membership small, high-profile, and utterly discreet. The guests were quiet, respected professionals who valued privacy and paid handsomely. The result? Arthur's pool area was arguably the quietest on the street, far less disruptive than the typical family barbecue or teenage party. Brenda Sterling, however, saw the resort's success as a personal affront. She had failed to defeat him with fines, fences, or legal threats. Now he was making money off her defeat. She convened an emergency HOA meeting, painting Arthur as a greedy mercenary exploiting a loophole. "He is turning our pristine residential neighborhood into a destination," she railed to the small, conservative board. "He's making a mockery of the covenants. We must amend the covenants. We must shut down this resort by unanimous vote." The board, however, was hesitant. Arthur's lawyer, Thorne, had attended the meeting and politely pointed out the legal disaster a covenants amendment would be. "Any amendment that specifically targets one licensed, compliant business owner is a clear act of retaliation and punitive malice," Thorne had stated calmly. It would expose the entire HOA to a lawsuit for damages far exceeding the cost of the pool. Thorne also had another ace up his sleeve. Arthur had strategically offered executive trial memberships to two key influential board members, a retired judge and the HOA treasurer, free of charge. They had quietly enjoyed the pristine, silent luxury of the resort. They publicly voted against the amendment. The vote failed. Humiliated, Brenda retreated, but she didn't give up. Her new strategy was a campaign of petty sabotage and hyper-enforcement against Arthur's resort guests. She began parking her large SUV directly across from Arthur's driveway, 2 inches from his legal property line, forcing guests to awkwardly maneuver. She stood in her yard, ostentatiously timing the length of a guest's stay with a stopwatch. She started using a powerful commercial leaf blower at 7:01 a.m., the earliest time allowed by the covenants, to kick up dust and debris onto Arthur's immaculately clean pool area. This last action was the final straw. The dust was a minor, persistent nuisance, but one morning, a leaf blower-propelled rock hit the side of the neurosurgeon's pristine black sedan as he was leaving. The neurosurgeon, who had been a quiet and compliant member, was furious. He didn't complain to Arthur, he called his own lawyer. Arthur, meanwhile, was preparing his ultimate defense. He had anticipated the leaf blower tactic. The previous week, he had installed high-resolution security cameras disguised as tasteful birdhouses on his property. They weren't just for security, they were set up to capture every square inch of Brenda's property line. That afternoon, he received a phone call from Thorne. "Arthur, we have a new plaintiff. Your resort member is suing Brenda personally for property damage and emotional distress. But that's not the best part. I just got a call from an old colleague. Brenda is in deep trouble." Thorne explained that during the legal discovery process for the pool fight, a meticulous audit of the Oakhaven HOA financials had been ordered. The audit revealed that under Brenda's aggressive one-woman control of the ARB, she had been systematically overcharging for maintenance fees on property liens and funneling the excess back into a secretarial discretionary fund, which she used for personal board expenses, luxurious furniture, an expensive new laptop, and elaborate catered board meetings that never took place. This was more than just petty enforcement, it was fraud. Arthur sent Thorne the video footage of the leaf blower incident, proving Brenda's malicious intent. The combination of the fraud investigation, the property damage lawsuit from a prominent community member, and the evidence of her petty harassment campaign was a tidal wave. Brenda Sterling, HOA chair, was not just stripped of her power. She was served with a criminal subpoena for misappropriation of funds. Arthur watched from the sanctuary of his lush, private resort as a police cruiser, not a Mercedes, pulled up to the beige fortress across the street. Part 4 beat, Karma and Justice. Brenda's malicious attempts at petty sabotage backfire spectacularly, leading to a criminal investigation into her financial fraud, triggered by the very legal actions she initiated against Arthur. The fall of Brenda Sterling was swift and humiliating. The police escorted her from her home while a small crowd of neighbors, some relieved, some shocked, watched from their driveways. The legal action against Arthur's pool and the lien on his property were immediately dropped. The new interim HOA board, chastened by the scandal and terrified of further lawsuits, sent Arthur a hand-signed, formal apology and a check refunding all his previous fines. The Hayes Resort was a success, but with the fight over, Arthur realized his original goal, peace. He didn't want to run a business, he wanted to enjoy his home. He called his lawyer. "Marcus, I think it's time to dissolve the Hayes Resort LLC. Thorne laughed. "You're walking away from a successful, high-profit business. Arthur, you're the only person I know who created a resort just to win a fight." "I created it to be left alone," Arthur corrected, "and now I am." He quietly shut down the private club, refunded the annual membership fees plus interest, and gave Walter a generous bonus. He took down the brass plaque, but he left the lush, beautiful horticultural enclosure. It was his green, unassailable wall of privacy. The pool returned to being what it was always meant to be, his personal oasis. The Oakhaven Estates HOA never bothered Arthur again. They learned a harsh, expensive lesson. Don't start a war you can't win, and definitely don't take on an opponent who knows how to weaponize the rules better than you do. The new board was a model of non-interference. The final, ironic twist came 6 months later. Arthur was enjoying a late afternoon swim, the only sound the gentle lapping of the water, when he saw a "For Sale" sign hammered into the pristine lawn across the street. The beige fortress was on the market. 2 weeks after the listing, Arthur was enjoying a peaceful morning coffee on his cabana deck when he heard a new sound, the low, pleasant burble of a water feature. He walked out to the edge of his pool and looked through a small, strategically placed window in his bamboo enclosure. A new family had bought Brenda's house. They were a young couple with 2 small children. The children were laughing, splashing in a brand-new inflatable kiddie pool on the back deck. It was small, harmless, and clearly temporary. But then Arthur noticed the husband was standing by the property line, looking over at Arthur's spectacular, private resort. He gave Arthur a hesitant, friendly wave. Arthur walked to the fence, giving a genuine smile. "Welcome to Oakhaven," he said. "Thanks," the man replied sheepishly. "Beautiful pool. We tried to get approval for an in-ground one, but the new HOA board, well, they're terrified of pools now. Said it would involve a thorough review of the entire water usage history of the neighborhood and could take 3 years, so we're stuck with this for now." He motioned to the inflatable pool. "Don't worry," Arthur said, the irony not lost on him. He picked up his coffee cup and raised it in a toast. "Enjoy your swim. It's a great neighborhood, very private." Arthur went back to his cabana, watching the sunlight dance on the surface of his own turquoise water. He had set out to fill a pool and ended up carving out a sanctuary, not just by winning a battle, but by utterly transforming the environment of the war itself. The irony was the greatest justice. He was now the reason no one else could easily have what he had fought so hard for. His fight had established a precedent of fear, making his pool the last of its kind. The ultimate, long-lasting consequence of Arthur's victory was a quiet, profound, and utterly exclusive peace. He had what he wanted, and no one would dare try to take it away. Part 5 beat, Ultimate Irony and Peace. Arthur achieves his final goal of peace and privacy, dissolving his resort. The ultimate consequence of his fight is that the traumatized HOA creates a prohibitive barrier for future pools, making Arthur's property the last and most exclusive one, thus cementing his victory forever.